The text message came in on a Tuesday morning at 9:14 a.m., while I was standing in my kitchen holding a grocery list with the words cranberry sauce and sweet potatoes written at the top. It was from my daughter, Rachel, my only child. The girl I had raised alone from the age of 6, after her father died in a helicopter crash outside of Mosul in 2003. The message said, "Mom, I need to talk to you about Thanksgiving. Marcus's parents are hosting this year at their place in Charleston. It's going to be a really formal thing. His dad is a big deal in the community, and there's going to be some important people there. I've been thinking about it a lot, and I don't think it's the right fit for you this year. I hope you understand. I love you. R." I read the message 4 times. Then I read it a 5th time. Then I put the grocery list down on the counter, sat down at my kitchen table, and I did something I had not done since the morning I got the flag off my husband's coffin in 2003. I laughed. Because I already knew where Marcus's parents lived. I already knew who his father was. I already knew what was going to happen in Charleston, South Carolina, on the 4th Thursday of November. And my daughter had no idea. The backstory. My name is Diane Whitaker. I am 58 years old. I live in a small brick house on a quiet street in Greenville, South Carolina, with a Labrador named Chief, and a garden that gets exactly 6 hours of sun a day. I retired from the United States Air Force 3 years ago. My daughter Rachel is 29. She got married last April to a man named Marcus Delacroix, whose family owns a shipping and logistics company based out of Charleston. The Delacroix family is what people in the South politely call old money. The kind of family whose name is on a wing of the Children's Hospital, whose grandfather went to Yale, whose Christmas cards feature 4 generations lined up on the porch of a house older than the state of Georgia. I had met Marcus's mother, Vivian, exactly twice. The first time was at Rachel and Marcus's engagement dinner in November of the year before. It was held at a private dining room in a country club outside of Charleston. I wore a navy blue dress that had cost me $89 at a belt clearance sale. Vivian wore what I later learned was a Carolina Herrera silk suit. She kissed the air near my cheek, held my hand for exactly 1.5 seconds, and said, "Diane, dear, Rachel has told us so much about you. She said you were in the military." She said military the way some people say prison. I smiled. I said yes. I said I had served 28 years in the Air Force. Vivian said, "Oh, how interesting. Well, it's lovely of you to come tonight," and she turned away. I did not see Marcus's father at that dinner. He was, according to Rachel, traveling for work. The second time I met Vivian was at the wedding itself, in April. She spent the reception with her back to me, laughing loudly with 3 women in identical pearl earrings. She did not introduce me to a single person. Rachel, my baby, the girl I had raised alone, spent the reception at Vivian's side, and I watched her, from a table in the back near the kitchen, learn to laugh the same laugh. I told myself it was just the wedding. I told myself she was overwhelmed. I told myself brides are allowed to be strange on their wedding days. I drove home to Greenville alone that night, 6 hours in the car. I cried for exactly 22 miles of I-26, and then I stopped, because my mother, a Baptist preacher's wife from Anderson County, had raised me on the principle that a woman cries once for a thing, and then she gets on with her life. Rachel called me the next morning. She thanked me for coming. She said Marcus's family had loved me. She said Vivian had told her I was a lovely woman with quiet dignity. I told my daughter I was glad she was happy. I told her I loved her. I hung up. I sat in my kitchen and I stared at a photograph on the refrigerator. A photograph of Rachel at 6 years old, sitting on my lap in my dress uniform, the morning of her father's funeral. She had wanted to sit on my lap. She had wanted to touch the ribbons on my chest. She had wanted to know what each one meant. I had told her, that morning, that the ribbons meant her mommy was going to keep her safe forever. I had meant it. I want to tell you something now, before we get to the Thanksgiving text message. Because if you're going to understand what happened in Charleston on that 4th Thursday of November, you need to understand who Rachel was, and who she was becoming, and how a mother watches her daughter drift toward a family that considers her, the mother, an embarrassment. Rachel and I were close once. We were close for a very long time. When her father died in Iraq, I was 30 years old and I was a captain, and I had a 6-year-old child and a career that required me to move every 3 years. I did not remarry. I did not date. I raised Rachel on air bases from Guam to Germany to Little Rock, Arkansas. I taught her to ride a bike on the flight line at Ramstein. I helped her with her fractions in a base library in Okinawa. I put her through the University of South Carolina on my salary and my late husband's survivor benefits, and not a single dollar from anyone else. I was promoted to full colonel in 2018. By then, Rachel was in law school, and by then, something had already started to change. Rachel had begun to be embarrassed by me. It started small. She stopped asking me to come to her law school events. She started introducing me to friends as, "My mom, she works for the government." She stopped mentioning the Air Force at all. When I retired in 2022, she did not attend my retirement ceremony. She said she had a work conflict. I told her I understood. I do not think she was ashamed of the Air Force. Exactly. I think she was ashamed of the smallness of it. In her mind, my career had been about missing her school plays and moving her to new cities and wearing a uniform to the grocery store on Saturday mornings. She did not see the rank. She did not see the 28 years. She did not see what it had cost. She saw a mother who wore Belk clearance dresses to her engagement dinner. And then she met Marcus. And then she met Marcus's family. And on a Tuesday morning in November, 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, she sent me a text message that said I didn't fit. The decision. I want to be honest with you about what I did after I read that text message. I did not text Rachel back for 2 days. I know that sounds petty. It probably was. But I needed the 2 days. I needed the 2 days because I had been telling myself, for 8 months since the wedding, that Rachel was just adjusting. I had been telling myself she still loved me. I had been telling myself she just needed time. The text message was proof that I had been lying to myself. On the Thursday after the text, I called my best friend. Her name is Colonel Rita Alvarez. Retired. We had gone through the Air War College together in 2011. She lived in Beaufort, South Carolina, about 2 hours from Charleston. I asked her to lunch. She said yes. I drove to Beaufort on a cold, bright Friday morning. We sat in a small diner near the water, and I told her the whole thing. The wedding, the 8 months of silence, the text message, the way Rachel had started saying, "my mother," instead of "my mom," in front of Marcus's family. Rita listened. She did not interrupt. She let me finish. Then she took a sip of her coffee and she said, "Diane, who is Marcus's father?" I said, "His name is Beauregard Delacroix. Everyone calls him Beau. He runs the family shipping company. I don't really know anything else about him. I've never met him." Rita put her coffee cup down very slowly. She said, "Diane, Beauregard Delacroix?" I said, "Yes. Why?" Rita reached into her purse. She pulled out her phone. She scrolled for a moment, and then she turned the phone around and showed me a photograph. The photograph was from 1991. It showed a group of 5 men standing on a runway in Saudi Arabia, in flight suits, in front of an F-15E Strike Eagle. 4 of them I did not recognize. The 5th one was a man I had not seen in 34 years. But I knew his face immediately. His name was Captain Beau Delacroix. He had been a weapons systems officer in the 336th Fighter Squadron out of Seymour Johnson Air Force Base. He had flown 37 combat missions during Operation Desert Storm, and in February of 1991, on a mission near the Iraqi-Kuwaiti border, his aircraft had been hit by anti-aircraft fire. His pilot had been killed. Captain Delacroix had ejected over hostile territory and had been on the ground for 11 hours before he was recovered. The rescue mission that recovered him had been coordinated out of a communications and intelligence center at King Khalid Military City. The officer running that communications center, the 24-year-old first lieutenant who had spent 11 hours on the radio, coordinating 3 separate aircraft, 2 ground teams, and 1 satellite pass to locate a downed weapons officer and bring him home alive, had been me. I had never met Beau Delacroix in person. I had only heard his voice on the radio. For the last 40 minutes of his 11-hour ordeal, when we finally established comms with him on his survival radio, he had thanked me. He had asked my name. I had told him, because that's what you tell a scared man on a survival radio at 3 a.m., I had told him my name was Lieutenant Whitaker and that I was going to get him home. We got him home. I never heard from him again. I did not expect to. That is not how those things work. I sat in that diner in Beaufort, 34 years later, looking at a photograph of Captain Beau Delacroix, now Beauregard Delacroix, shipping magnate, patriarch of the family that had just uninvited me from Thanksgiving, and I did not know what to feel. Rita was watching my face. She said, "Diane, does Rachel know?" I said, "No. Rachel doesn't know any of it. She barely knows I served in Desert Storm at all. She was 2 months old when I deployed. She thinks I did office work. Rita said, "Does Bo know Rachel is your daughter?" I said, "I don't know. Whitaker is a common name. And I haven't been Lieutenant Whitaker in 34 years. I've been Colonel Whitaker for 7 years and retired for 3. I don't know what Marcus told his father. I don't know if it's ever come up." Rita was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Diane, I want you to listen to me very carefully. You are not going to skip Thanksgiving. You are going to Charleston." I said, "Rita, I wasn't invited." Rita said, "Yes, you were. You were invited 8 months ago when Rachel got married, and Bo's family became your family. Vivian uninviting you does not change that. And Rachel, not standing up to Vivian does not change that. You are wearing your dress uniform, and you are going to walk into that house on Thursday afternoon like the officer you are." I said, "Rita, I can't do that to Rachel. She'll be humiliated." Rita leaned across the table. She said, "Diane, your daughter is not humiliated by you. Your daughter has forgotten who you are. There is a difference. And on Thursday, someone in that house is going to remind her. And it isn't going to be you." I drove home from Beaufort that afternoon. I stopped at a Cracker Barrel for dinner. I did not decide anything on the drive. I decided at 11:47 that night, standing in my bedroom, staring at the garment bag in the back of my closet, where my dress uniform had been hanging, untouched, for 3 years. I unzipped the bag. I took the uniform out, and I hung it on the back of my bedroom door, where I could see it when I woke up in the morning. Thanksgiving. The drive from Greenville to Charleston is 3 hours and 42 minutes. I made it in 3 hours and 36 minutes on the Thursday morning of Thanksgiving, which is the fastest I have ever driven that stretch of I-26 in my life. I did not tell Rachel I was coming. I did not tell anyone I was coming, except Rita, who had called me at 7 o'clock that morning and said only, "Diane, chin up, shoulders back. You've done harder things than this." I had done harder things than this, but I could not, in that moment, remember what any of them were. I arrived in Charleston at 12:14 in the afternoon. Dinner was scheduled for 2. I parked 2 blocks from the Delacroix house on Trad Street, in the historic district. I sat in my car for 6 minutes. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror. I was wearing my Air Force dress blues, the full uniform, 28 years of ribbons across my chest, the colonel's eagles on my shoulders, my command pilot wings. I had cross-trained as a pilot in 1998, something Rachel had never known about. My name tag, Whitaker. My hair pulled back, my shoes polished. I looked like a stranger. I looked like me. I got out of the car. I walked 2 blocks in the November sunshine, and at 12:31 p.m., I rang the doorbell of the Delacroix family home. A woman I did not recognize opened the door. She was in her 40s, wearing a black uniform. Housekeeper. She looked at me. She looked at my uniform. She said, "Yes, ma'am, may I help you?" I said, "My name is Diane Whitaker. I'm Rachel's mother." The housekeeper's face did not change. She said, "Please come in, ma'am. May I take your coat?" I said, "No, thank you." She led me down a long hallway with polished wood floors and portraits on the walls. I could hear voices from a room at the end of the hallway. Laughter. A woman's voice rising above the others. The clink of glasses. Vivian's voice. The housekeeper stopped at the doorway. She said, very quietly, "Ma'am, would you like me to announce you?" I said, "No, please don't." I stepped into the room. There were about 20 people in the drawing room. Vivian was standing near the fireplace, holding a champagne flute, talking to a group of women in identical camel-colored cashmere sweaters. Marcus was on the other side of the room, near the bar, talking to 2 men his age. And Rachel, my Rachel, was standing next to Vivian, in a beautiful cream-colored dress, laughing at something Vivian had just said. Rachel saw me first. Her face went white. The champagne flute in Vivian's hand did not move, but her mouth opened. The room got quiet in waves. First the group by the fireplace, then the group at the bar, then the guests in the corner near the piano. 20 people stopped talking, one small cluster at a time, as they turned to see what Vivian and Rachel were looking at. I stood in the doorway in my dress uniform and I did not say a word. Vivian recovered first. She was a Delacroix. She had been trained for this. She walked toward me with a small, tight smile. She said, "Diane, sweetheart, we weren't expecting you." I said, "Hello, Vivian. Happy Thanksgiving." Vivian said, "Diane, I think there may have been a miscommunication. Rachel had mentioned that This year, and that is when I heard a man's voice from the far end of the room. He said, "Vivi, who's at the door?" The voice was deep, southern, older. It came from an armchair near the fireplace that I had not noticed when I walked in. The chair was turned toward the fire. The man in it stood up. He was in his early 60s, silver hair, a charcoal suit. He turned around, still holding a glass of bourbon, and he looked at me across 20 feet of drawing room. He looked at my face. He looked at my ribbons. He looked at my name tag. His face changed. He did something that I will remember for the rest of my life. He set the bourbon down on the mantel, very carefully, very deliberately, and he walked across the drawing room toward me. Vivian said, "Beau, darling, this is Rachel's mother." Beau Delacroix stopped 4 feet in front of me. He looked at my face for a long moment. Then he said, very quietly, "Lieutenant Whitaker, King Khalid, February 24th, 1991. I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "You told me you were going to get me home." I said, "Yes, sir, I did." And Beauregard Delacroix, 63 years old, worth an estimated $140 million, patriarch of one of the oldest families in South Carolina, stepped back 1 pace, came to attention, and rendered a hand salute. He said, "Ma'am, thank you for my life." The drawing room was silent. I returned the salute. Beau lowered his hand. He did not lower his eyes. He turned his head, slowly, deliberately, and he looked at his wife. He said, "Vivienne, may I ask you a question?" Vivienne said, "Beau, He said, "May I ask you a question, Vivienne?" She stopped. He said, "Did you uninvite this woman from my Thanksgiving table?" Vivienne did not answer. Beau said, "Rachel, did your mother know she was uninvited?" Rachel, my Rachel, was crying. She had one hand over her mouth. She could not speak. Beau said, "Someone in this room needs to answer me, because I am about to lose my composure, and I would like to hear the answer before I do." Marcus stepped forward. He said, "Dad, it was a decision Rachel and Mom made. They thought it would be too formal." Beau nodded slowly. He said, "Too formal for a woman who saved my life." He turned back to me. His whole face softened. He said, "Colonel Whitaker, I owe you a Thanksgiving dinner. I have owed you a Thanksgiving dinner for 34 years. Would you do me the honor of joining my family at the table?" I said, "Sir, I would be honored." He took my arm. He walked me, past his wife, past his son, past his daughter-in-law, past 20 guests standing in a silent drawing room, to the head of the table. He pulled out the chair next to his own. He seated me himself. The reconciliation. Rachel came to see me the next morning. I was staying at a small hotel on King Street, 3 blocks from the Delacroix house. I had left the dinner at 9 o'clock the night before. Beau had walked me to the door. He had kissed my hand. He had said, "Colonel, my home is your home, always." Rachel came at 8:30 the next morning. She was wearing jeans and a sweatshirt. Her hair was in a messy bun. Her eyes were swollen from crying. I let her in. She sat on the edge of the hotel bed. I sat in the chair by the window. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then she said, "Mom, I'm sorry." I said, "I know you are." She said, "I didn't know. About Iraq, about Beau." "I didn't know any of it." I said, "I know you didn't." She said, "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I looked at my daughter. My 29-year-old daughter, my only child, the girl I had raised alone, and I said the truest thing I have ever said to her. I said, "Rachel, I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to love me for my ribbons. I wanted you to love me for me. And for 29 years you did. And then you met a family that taught you that a person's worth is on the outside. And you started to look at the outside of your own mother. And I let you. Because I thought if I told you the ribbons, you would love me for the wrong reasons." She was crying. She said, "Mom, I love you for the right reasons. I always did. I got lost." I said, "I know, sweetheart." She said, "Can you forgive me?" I said, "Rachel, I forgave you the moment I got the text message. That's not the question. The question is whether you can forgive yourself. And that's going to take longer." She came over to the chair. She sat on the floor at my feet, the way she used to sit on the floor at my feet when she was 6 years old and we were living in Little Rock. She put her head on my knee. She said, "Mom, tell me about King Khalid." I told her. I told her about the 11 hours on the radio. I told her about the sound of Beau's voice when we finally established comms. I told her about the Marine sergeant who ran the ground team. I told her about the phone call I made to my mother the next morning to tell her I was okay, and how my mother did not know I had not been okay until I said it. I told her about her father. I told her, for the first time, about the night before her father's last deployment, when he had sat on the edge of our bed and told me that if anything happened to him, he wanted our daughter to grow up strong. Not brave, not tough, strong. And how he had said the difference between being tough and being strong was that a tough person never asks for help, and a strong person knows when to. Rachel cried on my knee for a long time. Then she said, "Mom, can we do Christmas at your house this year?" I said, "Yes, sweetheart, we can." She said, "Just us?" I said, "Just us." If you have ever been made small by the people you raised, if you have ever been quietly erased by a child who forgot who you were before they were born, I want you to do something for me. I want you to leave one word in the comments below. Just one word for the mother, or the grandmother, or the aunt, or the woman in your life who never told you the whole story of who she was. Say her name, that's all. Just her name. Because someone in this comment section is going to read it, and they're going to remember to ask their own mother a question they never thought to ask. And if this story reminded you that dignity outlasts pride, subscribe. Because next week, I'm telling you about a woman whose son-in-law spent 5 years calling her the crazy aunt. She wasn't crazy. She was a federal judge. I'll see you there,